Trent Wexford had been telling the whole diner for 10 minutes that the scruffy old man in the corner booth needed to be thrown out before he stunk up the whole place, loud enough that half the tables had stopped eating to watch. Merrick Coburn said nothing, kept his eyes on his coffee, and let the insults roll past him the way he'd let considerably worse roll past him decades earlier, in places where the stakes had been life and death rather than a mayor's son's wounded pride. Then the bell over the door rang. A 4-star general walked into the Brackenridge diner, saw Merrick's face across the room, and snapped to attention so fast his own aide nearly walked into the back of him. What General Marcus Ridgway said next would leave Trent Wexford unable to look anyone in that diner in the eye again. The Brackenridge diner had sat on Main Street in Brackenridge, Virginia, for 36 years. A chrome-trimmed relic that still ran a genuine breakfast special and still filled up most mornings with the same regulars who'd been coming since the place opened. A jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked properly since the previous decade, but that nobody had gotten around to replacing. Merrick Coburn had claimed the corner booth every Tuesday and Friday morning for the past 11 years, arriving on his motorcycle at exactly 7:15, ordering the same black coffee and 2 eggs over easy, and rarely saying more than a polite word to Donna, the waitress who'd worked there almost as long as the booth had been his, the two of them having developed an easy, wordless rhythm over a decade of the same order, delivered the same way. Merrick rode with the Iron Legion Motorcycle Club, a chapter built almost entirely of veterans who'd found something worth keeping in riding together after their service ended. And at 79, he was easily the oldest member still making every ride the club organized, refusing every suggestion from younger members that he take it easier. Most people in Brackenridge who noticed him at all saw exactly what Trent Wexford saw that morning. An old man in a weathered leather jacket, quiet almost to the point of invisibility, the kind of presence a town stops registering after enough years of seeing it in the same booth, the specific unremarkable familiarity of a fixture nobody thinks to ask questions about. Before we get to what happened when that bell rang, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. I read every single one of them. Now, back to that diner, where a mayor's son was about to humiliate a stranger he had no idea he should have been terrified of, in front of a room full of neighbors who were about to remember this morning for a considerably longer time than Trent would have liked. Because the 4-star general walking through that door was about to explain exactly who Merrick Coburn actually was. Merrick had served 31 years in the Army, retiring as a command sergeant major after 2 tours in Vietnam, and considerably more time than that spent quietly training the officers who eventually rose to run the entire institution. The kind of career that never made headlines, but shaped the careers of dozens of men who went on to wear stars themselves. In 1969, during an ambush that had pinned down most of his platoon in a rice paddy with no clear way out, artillery and small arms fire coming from 3 directions at once, Merrick had organized and personally led the covering fire that got 31 wounded and able-bodied soldiers back to safety, staying behind himself with 2 other men until every last soldier had cleared the kill zone. An action that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award the Army gives. An honor he had never once mentioned to anyone at the Brackenridge diner in 11 years of sitting in that booth. He had buried his wife 9 years earlier, had 1 daughter who lived out of state and called every Sunday without fail, and had found, in the Iron Legion Motorcycle Club, exactly the kind of quiet camaraderie he'd spent his whole career surrounded by, and had missed considerably more than he let on since retiring. Trent Wexford was 24, the mayor's only son, and had spent most of his adult life discovering exactly how far his father's position could stretch when he wanted something to go a certain way. Coasting through 2 failed business ventures already funded quietly by his father's connections and a general assumption around town that crossing him meant crossing City Hall, by extension. That morning, Annoyed that the diner was too crowded for the private table he'd wanted for a meeting with two business associates, he decided the quiet old man in the corner booth made an easy target for the kind of scene that usually got him what he wanted. "This guy's had that booth for like an hour," Trent said loudly, gesturing at Merrick without addressing him directly. "Some of us are actually trying to conduct real business here. Somebody should tell him this isn't a homeless shelter." Donna, refilling coffee 2 tables over, went rigid at the comment, and 2 regulars near the counter exchanged an uncomfortable glance. But nobody said anything. The particular paralysis of a small town where everyone knew exactly whose son was making the scene and exactly how much trouble crossing him could cause for a business that depended on city permits and good relations with the mayor's office. Trent kept going, encouraged by the silence, mocking Merrick's jacket, his age. The smell of gasoline, he claimed, was ruining his breakfast. Working himself up into exactly the kind of performance a man puts on when he's certain nobody in the room is going to stop him. His 2 business associates laughing along uneasily rather than risk being on the wrong side of him either. Merrick didn't respond. He'd faced considerably worse than an entitled young man's insults in his life, and had learned decades ago that some battles weren't worth the breath it took to fight them. He kept his eyes on his coffee, jaw tight but otherwise unmoved. The kind of stillness that comes from a lifetime of choosing which fights actually matter. The bell over the diner's door rang, and General Marcus Ridgway walked in. 4 stars on each shoulder, an aide a step behind him. Both of them stopping in the diner to grab coffee on their way to a Veterans Day ceremony scheduled that afternoon at the county courthouse. A stop neither of them had planned more than an hour in advance. Ridgway's eyes swept the room out of the same habit that had kept him alive for 4 decades of service, and landed on the corner booth, on a face he hadn't seen in person in over 15 years, but would have recognized anywhere on earth, gray now, and lined in ways it hadn't been the last time they'd shared a meal together. He came to attention so fast his own aide nearly collided with his back, and rendered a full, formal salute across the length of the diner. "Sergeant Major Coburn," Ridgway said, his voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room, every fork stopping mid-air at once. "Sir." Merrick stood slowly, the old instinct of returning a salute still automatic after all these years despite knees that complained about the sudden movement, and the entire diner, Trent Wexford included, went completely still. "At ease, General," Merrick said, a faint smile crossing his face for the first time that morning. "Didn't expect to see you in this diner." Ridgway crossed the room and gripped Merrick's hand with both of his own. "I wouldn't be standing here at all if it weren't for you," he said, turning to address the room without letting go of Merrick's hand. "This man pulled 31 soldiers, myself included, out of an ambush in 1969 that should have killed every one of us. He stayed behind under fire until the last man was clear. I have spent 35 years trying to find a way to properly thank him for the fact that I got to have a career, a family, and a life at all, and I have never once managed to say it adequately." He turned toward Trent, whose face had gone the particular gray color of a man realizing exactly how badly he had misjudged a situation in front of an audience that was never going to forget it. "I take it you 2 have already met," Ridgway said, his tone even but unmistakably pointed, every word landing with the weight of a man who had heard every insult on his way across the room and chosen his moment, deliberately. Trent Wexford said nothing for a long moment. The silence in that diner heavier than anything his loud performance had built over the previous 10 minutes, his business associates suddenly very interested in their own coffee cups. "I didn't know," he finally managed. "I'm sorry, sir. I had no idea who." Merrick cut him off gently. Without malice. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me decently," he said. "That's sort of the whole point of decency." Trent had no answer for that, and left the diner without his meeting, without his coffee, and without a single person in that room willing to meet his eyes on his way out. Word of what happened in the Brackenridge diner that morning moved through the small town within hours, and by evening had reached the mayor's own office directly, several constituents calling to describe exactly what his son had done to a decorated war hero in front of a packed diner. Mayor Wexford, mortified and facing real political fallout with a re-election campaign only months away, drove to Merrick's house himself that same night to apologize personally, an apology Merrick accepted calmly, while making clear that the apology belonged considerably more to Trent than to a father embarrassed on his behalf. The local paper ran the story 2 days later under a headline that made no mention of the mayor's office at all, focusing entirely on the ambush, the rescue, and the plaque the diner was already planning to install. The Brackenridge diner has a small brass plaque on the corner booth now, installed within the month at Donna's own insistence, reading simply reserved in honor of CSM Merrick Coburn, Distinguished Service Cross. Though Merrick still sits there every Tuesday and Friday the same as always, telling anyone who asks that he'd have been just as happy without the plaque, the coffee having tasted the same either way for 11 years running. Trent Wexford wrote Merrick a formal letter of apology the following week, and, at his father's insistence, though apparently with genuine remorse behind it, has since spent one Saturday a month volunteering at the regional VA hospital, a commitment Merrick has quietly kept tabs on through a friend who works there without ever mentioning it to Trent directly, curious in spite of himself whether the change would actually last once the town's attention moved on to something else. Trent Wexford humiliated a quiet old man who had once saved dozens of lives without ever once asking for credit. A 4-star general walked through one diner door and reminded an entire room exactly who had earned it. If you believe true honor rarely announces itself until somebody else insists on it, tell us where you're watching from tonight. I read every comment.